We work within Council Sustainable Environment Department. It deals with economic development, strategic land use management, development assessment, and natural resource management, and regulatory compliance, which does incorporate weeds. The topics that I will be covering are from our department, and they are our local growth management strategies, which particularly the residential and the rural residential local growth management strategies, and how they relate to the Department of Planning Mid-North Coast Regional Strategy. Our Kempsey Local Environmental Plan, talking about land use zonings, land use permissibility, minimum lot sizes, land use conflict, and how it also relates to some farm succession planning. And then we will touch on natural resources and the estuary management planning, which covers riparian restoration projects, acid sulphate soil management, wet pasture projects, and overall the environmental health and biodiversity of land. So we provide direct and indirect support to agriculture. Essentially, with strategic planning, the aim is to preserve the agricultural potential of suitable land within Kempsey Shire, and then to set aside the most suitable areas for agriculture by applying the appropriate land use zones to those areas. And we do that within the local environmental plan. And we also seek to ensure that agricultural land uses are not overly restricted or constrained, while seeking to ensure that agricultural activities which could pose an amenity issue beyond the property are subject to assessment and or operating conditions that minimise any of those amenity impacts on adjoining lands. And essentially in doing that we are addressing land use conflicts and apply appropriate buffers to certain types of agricultural developments. And in natural resource management, we provide a more direct means of support by facilitating landowners to undertake projects on their land to improve the overall environmental health of their land, which should also increase the agricultural viability. A lot of these projects are focused in the lower Macleay, the floodplain, but we do encourage riparian restoration and bank erosion control throughout the Macleay Valley, and any other initiative which would improve the agricultural and environmental health of the land. And as Lindy Brown noted, we do often work in partnership with other organisations such as local land services, land care, and any other NGOs, Wetland Care Australia, to deliver the outcomes. We'll just talk a little bit about the local growth management strategies. We have two local growth management strategies, the residential and the rural residential local growth management strategy. That is created under the Department of Planning's Regional Growth Plan. And the regional growth strategy outlines the extent of the urban footprint and how much development will occur. As part of their project, as part of their strategy, the Department of Planning and Environment has had a farmland mapping project. They had that for the North Coast and the Mid-North Coast region, and they mapped what they called regionally significant farmland. Essentially, that in Kempsey, that is all on the alluvial, on the floodplain, and where it is adjacent to major creeks and rivers. That's all been mapped as regionally significant farmland. When council goes to undertake their local growth management strategies, they must avoid all of that significant farmland. So it cannot be included for urban expansion or future development in its growth strategies. So the aim of that is to preserve that, what is considered significant prime agricultural land for the future. So in our rural residential land release strategy, we were conscious of where that boundary was, in particular from the department, but also the other the other areas of agriculture that we had within our shire, so we sought not to encroach upon those. We think we found quite a good balance in setting aside some areas where development can occur without impinging upon the agricultural potential. The local environmental plan is the main document planning document we use to control development, where it occurs and how it occurs and what type of development occurs. The Kempsey Local Environmental Plan is a 2013 is what they call a new standard LEP, and as such it's got standard land use definitions that the state has rolled out across for local governments to use. So for the first time we've got quite an extensive standard definition of agriculture, whereas in previous documents there was, I think it was a definition from the Local Government Act from 1919 that was kicking around as the main definition, but it wasn't very specific. So now we've got very specific and extensive definition of agriculture. So I don't want to do too much of a planning lesson, but I thought it might be handy to see how that document defines agriculture. It means any of the following: aquaculture, extensive agriculture, intensive livestock agriculture, and intensive plant agriculture. And it's sort of a nested definition, because within the definitions there are more definitions that keep rolling out. So I will go through the four there, but if for anyone really interested, it does go on. You can look at the LEP. So aquaculture has the same meaning as in the Fisheries Act. Extensive agriculture, which is probably the definition that covers broadly what most people do as just general agriculture, if that's appropriate to say. It's production of crops or fodder, including irrigated pasture and fodder crops for commercial purposes, the grazing of livestock for commercial purposes, beekeeping, and dairy pasture-based dairy. So again, I guess there's a focus there on the commercial purposes, so it's not, if somebody has a few cows, it may not be considered for commercial purposes. And it also includes beekeeping, which is as an activity, which is nice to see. Then we have intensive livestock agriculture, means the keeping or breeding for commercial purposes of cattle, poultry, pigs, goats, horses, or other livestock that are fed wholly or substantially on externally sourced feed, and includes any of the following: dairies are restricted, feedlots, piggeries, and poultry farms. And then we have intensive plant agriculture, which includes the cultivation of irrigated crops for commercial purposes other than irrigated pasture or fodder crops, horticulture, turf farming, and viticulture. So the local environmental plan also sets aside various land use zones, from environmental to business to industrial, residential, and our rural zones, land use zones, comprise what's known as the RU1, primary production, and that contains all of the regional significant farmland and other land that's considered to be the best productive land within the Shire. We've got rural landscape, which is essentially all the rest, which sometimes it may also be high quality and but for some reason hadn't been mapped, but generally it's land that is of not as great productive value in the soil. Then we've also got RU4 zone, which is a primary production, small lots. That was intended to be for probably what you might call hobby farms, or land that activities that didn't need such a large area of land. I thought I'd go just through a land use table in case anyone was interested. There are generally, in a land use table in an LEP, there are generally 4 standard parts. It contains the zone objectives, and it contains item 2, which is any development that's permissible without consent, and then item 3 is development that is permissible with consent, so it requires a development application to council, and then development that is prohibited. That hasn't come across too well, but I just wanted to show you what it actually looked like within the document. The zone is there, the objectives are there. That's your development permitted without consent, that's the development permitted with consent, and this is development that's prohibited. Just in case you wanted to scroll through the legislation and try and find things for yourself when you were thinking of doing an activity. I did think it was useful to perhaps run through just the objectives of the zone, because what planners would use them for is if a development application is submitted, we assess what's proposed, if it's a development that requires consent, and the objectives of the zone are a good way of seeing whether it is suitable, apart from just the land use permissibility. So the objective of the RU1 zone is to encourage sustainable primary industry production by maintaining and enhancing the natural resource base, encourage diversity in primary industry enterprises and systems appropriate for the area, to minimise the fragmentation and alienation of resource lands, to minimise conflict between land uses within this zone and land uses within adjoining zones, to maintain the rural and scenic character of the zone, to encourage ecotourist facilities and tourist and visitor accommodation that minimise adverse impacts on primary industry production and scenic amenity of the area, to enable agricultural support activities to be carried out on land within the zone in a manner that does not significantly reduce the agricultural and horticultural production potential of the land and the locality, and to encourage development that is compatible with the character of the zone. So fairly extensive objectives. In creating the land use table for that zone and looking at what development should be permissible, it was essentially because of the value of that land being in the soil. If it was development that was not requiring prime soil, well, we tended to make that less of a priority in terms of its permissibility. And sometimes even thought prohibiting it would be suitable because what couldn't occur there would occur could occur in RU2, and we have extensive areas of both within the Shire. So the objectives of the RU2 zone to encourage sustainable primary industry production by maintaining and enhancing the natural resource base, to maintain the rural landscape character of the land, and to provide for a range of compatible land uses, including extensive agriculture. And finally, the RU4 ones are to enable sustainable primary industry and other compatible land uses, to encourage and promote diversity and employment opportunities in relation to primary industry enterprises, particularly those that require smaller lots or that are more intensive in nature, to minimise conflict between land uses within this zone and land uses within adjoining zones, and to ensure that the nature, scale and operation of any development is compatible with the amenity of the locality. In addition to the land use zones, we also have minimum lot sizes in the LEP, and this probably is the thing that causes the most problem for people within the LEP in rural zones. We have a minimum lot size for subdivision and dwelling houses in those rural zones. So for the RU1 and RU2 zones, the minimum lot size is 40 hectares. And in the RU4 zone, it's 8 hectares. In some of the existing RU4 zones, there's potential to go to 4 hectares in an area around Columbatti. But as part of our rural residential land release strategy, we've also allocated that potential to all of the RU4 land. The purpose of the minimum lot size is to prevent the fragmentation of rural land while ensuring that there's still a viable area of land available for agricultural activity. This will sort of vary from locality to locality. So out in the Western Council areas, they have a much larger minimum lot size. Sometimes it's 1,000 hectares. In Nambucca, they used to have up in the very western portions, it was 100 hectares. But we are all, the largest lot size we've got is 40 hectares. So it's probably suitable for a lot of activities. It may be too small for some, but for the majority, it's probably the right lot size. One other thing that I'd just like to touch on in terms of strategic planning is something related to farm succession planning. At the June council meeting, council endorsed a planning proposal to amend the Kempsey LEP to permit detached dual occupancy and secondary dwellings in the rural zones. Currently we permit dual occupancies, but they must be attached to the existing dwelling, or they must be two dwellings joined together. Traditionally, I mean, the reason they weren't permissible is the fragmentation of rural agricultural land concept. So your only option for a second dwelling on your property was for a rural workers dwelling. But to get that classification of a rural workers dwelling was quite onerous, and not many were able to achieve it. So council has over the years noted an increase in inquiries from people living on agricultural land who are either ageing or struggling for some reason or another to operate the farm by themselves, and want family members to relocate there, maybe children or other family members. But the real sort of downside, or the thing that is off-putting for those people coming in, is that they want to have a separate dwelling. They don't want to be attached to the primary dwelling, which is understandable. So because the way the new LEP is drafted, we have an option now to allow a variety of additional dwellings on properties. So we consider that we can enable a second dwelling of some kind to be permissible that will not cause a huge footprint or too much fragmentation of the agricultural land, with suitable development controls. And we think that that's going to be, we hope that that's going to be a really good option for agricultural landowners. And it could actually keep farms operating where they may have been abandoned because they can't get that on-site assistance and family support. So we hope it allows agriculture to continue as a land use where it may not have.